The most notable alternative conspiracy theory about the murder of Biggie Smalls was put out by the late LAPD detective Russell Poole, who claimed a disgraced LAPD cop named David Mack, who went to prison for robbing a bank, and a college friend of Mack's named Amir Muhammad had carried out the hit on Big, using Mack's mid-90s Chevy Impala during the drive-by shooting. At the core of Poole's theory are several jailhouse informants who came forward in the first few months and then years after Biggie was killed in Los Angeles in 1997. I've already covered two of these informants in previous deep dive episodes, Wayman Anderson and Michael Robinson. But both of their stories were easily debunked and they ultimately recanted. But Detective Poole's theory continues to get traction today thanks to books, podcasts, and YouTube videos. And as this theory evolved, another inmate came forward in 2000. His name was Kenneth Boagni, an inmate in California serving 40 years to life under California's 3 strikes law. Bogny helped add another disgraced former LAPD cop to the conspiracy, David Mack's friend, Rafael Perez, one of the most notorious cops in history and supposedly part of the inspiration for Denzel Washington's character in the epic movie Training Day.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
Bogny came forward claiming that he had befriended Perez while they were together in the same prison for 8 months, from November 1999 to July 2000, and that for some reason, Perez had allegedly confessed to him the whole scheme to kill Biggie. Bogny is a very important figure in Russell Poole's conspiracy theory. He was interviewed for a podcast by a former FBI agent and a journalist who have pushed Poole's theory for years. So important to them that he was the focus of their second episode ever in their first season. And he was also one of the centerpieces of author Randall Sullivan's book, Dead Wrong, his second book pushing Poole's theory, where he mentions Bogny's name 133 times. Bogny is extremely important to the Russell Poole theory. But in this episode, for the first time ever, we'll get into what Bogny actually specifically told the LAPD. And I know this because I have the records for 10 interviews and contacts that Bogny had with law enforcement officers from 2000 to 2001.
We're in the Calipatria State Prison. We're speaking with Kenny, Boagni?
Yeah,
Bogny.
And in the end, I'll show you how that new interview that Bogny did for that podcast a few years ago completely destroys this whole story. I have to say that listening to Bogny on tape, I actually find him pretty likable. And I think that him spending his life in prison because of California's 3 strikes law is honestly a travesty. And I believe his original reason for coming forward may have really been altruistic, which was to expose that Rafael Perez was allegedly making up dirt on a lot of the cops caught up in the Rampart scandal as payback against people that Perez felt had wronged him. But I also think, especially with the more explosive accusations like with the Biggie case, that Bogny may have been prone to jumping to his own conclusions, possibly some exaggeration, and claiming that Perez had told him things that I'm not sure Perez actually told him, or that Perez himself may have made up or exaggerated. And this episode is going to lay out why. Bogny's story begins about 3 months after he was housed with Rafael Perez, on October 11th, 2000, when he was interviewed at Calipatria State Prison, which is in the desert near California's border with Mexico. He was interviewed by an LAPD officer who was representing several of the cops caught up in a huge police scandal that would become known as the Rampart scandal, which had been kickstarted by Rafael Perez himself when he pleaded guilty the previous year to stealing cocaine from an LAPD property room, and had started ratting out his fellow officers for a slew of alleged offenses. It became one of the biggest police scandals in U.S. history.
Add another 9 to the list of cases thrown out because of the LAPD corruption scandal.
Now, it's been claimed that Bogny was first interviewed months earlier in March 2000. But according to him, this October of 2000 interview was actually the first one.
Did they interview in March of this year?
That's way before October, you know that. October's not too long ago, just a couple months back.
Yeah, that was the first time I seen him. Was the first time Mr. Armas came. Was the first time.
And we know
I
that
heard
because we can ask the president. They'll show us who's been. Okay.
And in this first interview, the officer meeting with Bogny had heard that Perez was in the cell next to him and that he and Perez were reportedly tight. And he wanted to know what Perez had supposedly told him. Of course, Bogny, who had no hope of getting his sentence reduced, refused to have the interview recorded and immediately asked what was in it for him, as most of us would. Bogny tells him he has information that would blow you away about Perez, and that he and Perez were, quote, road dogs during the 8 months that they were in prison together, and that they would play basketball in the yard, eat meals together, and hang out in Perez's cell for hours after dinner. He also says that Perez and Officer David Mack were very tight, and that they were both involved with Suge Knight, and that Perez was present when Biggie was killed. He also claims Perez is vindictive and is making false charges against LAPD officers in the Rampart scandal. But then he seems to hold back. He says he won't talk about the Biggie topic or Perez's alleged gang association any further because, quote, it was very big. And he refuses to discuss Suge Knight in writing because it was too big to talk about at this time. He ends up signing a written statement about other things that Perez allegedly told him regarding the Rampart scandal and other topics unrelated to Suge Knight and Biggie, but he refuses several requests to allow this interview to be recorded unless there comes a time when it would benefit him. A month later, on November 6, 2000, a pair of LAPD officers conduct a follow-up interview with Bogny. And once again, he doesn't want to be tape recorded, and now he doesn't want to talk at all unless he can reach an agreement with the DA or the U.S. Attorney's Office. Nothing about Biggie's murder is discussed in this interview. A week later, those two officers interview Bogny again, and he reiterates that Rafael Perez is mad at the LAPD and vindictive, and the conversation is focused once again on the various Rampart scandal accusations that Perez has made. Again, there is no mention of Biggie's murder. And a few weeks later, the lead detective at the time on the now 3-year-old Biggie Smalls cold case is informed that Bogny has claimed that Perez and Mack were involved in the murder in some way. And that detective's name is Steve Katz. And his name is going to come up in the story again in a big way later. The following day, a pair of new detectives meet with Bogny, and this time it's taped, finally. But unfortunately, they've already agreed that Bogny doesn't want to discuss any murders or the bank robbery. Again, he seems to be avoiding that issue completely, and it's not entirely clear why that is.
You've made it clear to us that you don't want to talk about any murders or any bank robberies at this time, maybe later on.
He explains that he and Perez were allowed to hang out together in a cell, even though it was against the rules.
What are the rules that the deputies tell you? Is this allowed to have 2-3 guys in a cell together?
No, not at all. It's definitely against the rules.
Okay.
They called us one time when it was a problem, and they wasn't gonna open the cell up for a day room, so I'm stuck in this cell. So I had to, push the button, man. And,
what deputy let you out, do you know?
I'm not sure which one it was.
He didn't make a big deal about it?
No, it wasn't no big deal.
And he tells them about various other claims that Perez made while they were hanging out together. But when pressed, Bogny has lied on the details.
He said something about a guy, and I knew the guy.
Who's the guy? What do you mean? What guy?
A guy, a gang member, a black gang member.
Who's this black gang member?
I'm not gonna mention his name.
Now, what kind of coke was Perez taking? Did he tell you?
Right.
Was it rocked up? Was it powdered?
I don't know. He didn't say if it was rocked up or powdered.
And the detectives challenge him over some of his claims, like that Bogny and Perez were allowed to hang out in cells together.
If somebody told us that it would almost be impossible for you and Perez to play basketball every day in the yard with everybody else, would they be lying?
Yep.
If somebody told us that you and Perez weren't in the cells together all those many times that you're just claiming,
They lying.
they're lying.
Yep.
If they would tell us that Perez stayed to himself, didn't socialize with anybody,
They're not gonna tell you that.
This isn't just a ruse by these detectives. A couple months earlier, shortly after Bogny first came forward with his claims about being tight with Perez, a deputy at the detention facility where they had been held together was interviewed and said she has never seen any person in Perez's cell other than Perez himself, and that Perez and Kenneth Boagni were friends, but Bogny did not spend time in Perez's cell or vice versa. It also seems difficult to tell the difference between what Bogny heard directly from Perez versus what he had merely assumed or had heard from some other source, and at times, Bogny himself seems confused.
But now, from my understanding, he's saying that he told the sergeant that he did bang the dude's head and threw him down the stairs.
Who told you that is what I'm getting to.
I heard it from somewhere. I'm not sure who told me that, but I heard it from somewhere.
You didn't hear that from Perez? Obviously, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could have been him.
So that means Perez is telling you two stories then. Well, I'm here because of these interviews, and I want to find out how you found this out.
Everything I said on them interviews, Perez told me.
Now, at the time of these interviews, Bogny was set to testify at a Board of Rights hearing for an LAPD sergeant who had been falsely accused and swept up in the Rampart scandal. And during that testimony, just 3 days later, Bogny accused one of these detectives, whose interview with him you just heard, of witness intimidation to preclude him from testifying at the Board of Rights. That accusation then launched an internal affairs investigation into these two detectives, which ultimately found that Bogny's accusation was unfounded, and stated that as their interview with Bogny was concluded and they were preparing to leave, Bogny initiated a conversation about his safety and the Board of Rights process. And the detective simply responded with his honest opinion, because Perez had reportedly become popular with the prison population in California because his testimony against Rampart cops was leading to cases getting tossed out and guys being freed from prison. And now Bogny is possibly about to ruin all of that by accusing Perez of lying about these cops. Here's one of the detectives Bogny accused of trying to intimidate him, explaining the situation in an interview with Internal Affairs.
While we were talking, he stated that him testifying against Perez could be dangerous to him because he would be taking money out of other inmates' hands, people that are trying to get out of prison. He said he was coming out to LA and he would be placed in protective custody. And I asked him how he knew that was going to happen. He said because Armis told him he would be put in protective custody. I believe the corrections officer asked him, "Are you concerned for your safety? I will put you in protective custody if you are, but you have to ask." He says, "No, I'm not asking for it." And it's he's playing a word game, is what I was feeling. And I made a comment, "Hey, don't play a word game with the guard. Do you or don't you want protective custody?"
You thought that maybe this moment was when Bogny became upset with you.
Well, he actually stood up. When I mentioned don't play a word game with the guard, he actually stood up and made a fist. I looked at him as a witness, just like any other witness. I'm always looking out for the welfare of my witnesses.
And obviously, if this is something that just came up casually at the end of an interview, and it was Bogny himself who brought it up, clearly those detectives were not sent there to intimidate him. So what about Biggie's murder? Bogny has given several interviews now, but he's only hinted at having information about the Biggie case, and he's refused to talk about it again since then. Well, 11 days after the interview that you just heard, on December 19th, 2000, one of the original two officers who've been interviewing Bogny repeatedly up until now is back again, meeting him this time at the Los Angeles County Men's Jail in downtown Los Angeles. And here, Bogny is going to talk about Biggie's murder, because suddenly he remembers more conversations he had with Rafael Perez, even though it's been about 5 months since they were housed together. He claims that Rafael Perez told him that Perez and David Mack were working security for Death Row Records at the party that Biggie was killed leaving, the one at the Peterson Museum. And Bogny then lists some very basic facts about what happened the night Biggie died. And it seems that none of it is correct. He claims that the night of the murder, Perez saw Biggie Smalls walk out to his car, which was a blue Monte Carlo with Daytona rims. But of course, in reality, Biggie was riding in a green GMC Suburban, not a blue Monte Carlo. And if the implication is that Biggie wandered out into the parking garage to his vehicle, Biggie wasn't really walking anywhere that night. His leg was still injured from a serious car accident that he'd been in with his friend Lil Cease months earlier.
Yeah, he was in the car, so he broke his finger bone. Okay. When was that? That was in September. That's why he had the cane. Yeah.
And his crew dropped him off right in front of the doors to the venue when he arrived, and then they picked him up right in front of those doors when he left.
Big cannot really walk, so he had to take time. I told the guys who had the truck, go downstairs, put them directly in front of the door. He said, park it right as close to the front door as possible.
His entourage also stated that once he was inside the party, he sat down at their table and didn't move again until they all left the party together.
And he said when Biggie sat down, he never left that spot. Got up, walked in, sat down, got up, he was leaving. One time he got up, he was leaving.
Bogny says that upon spotting Biggie taking this supposed walk to this non-existent Monte Carlo, Perez claims he then called David Mack on his cell phone and, quote, told Mack that this was a good time, and that Mack then called 2 other people who came and shot and killed Biggie Smalls. Of course, this also gets a basic fact of the case wrong, because the killer who shot Biggie was alone. There was not another person in the car with him. Bogny also claims that Perez then walked over and personally saw the body of Biggie Smalls. A couple of weeks later, the 2 officers who've been meeting with Bogny regularly come and interview him again, and he repeats his story about Biggie's murder, where Rafael Perez allegedly claimed he saw Biggie outside the party. And when Perez notifies Mack, Mack calls him back and tells him to get out of the way, and that folks are on their way, and then approximately 10 to 15 minutes later, Biggie was dead. Now, a lot of conspiracy theories only hold up if you don't really think about them too hard. But once you start logically thinking them through and dig below the surface, they tend to fall apart. And that is exactly what happens here. People pushing Russell Poole's theory that these guys carried out Biggie's murder make contradictory claims, possibly without even realizing it. Because they'll claim on one hand that Perez and Mack took days off of work before the party where Biggie was killed so they could plan the murder. But then according to Bogny, their own witness, it was actually a spur-of-the-moment decision. Like they just happened to be working security there that night and didn't even know Biggie was going to be there until Perez spotted him. And the claim that Biggie was killed within 15 minutes of Perez spotting him outside the party is another big problem for people pushing this theory about Biggie's murder. And the problem is Los Angeles itself. Let's say that this was a spur-of-the-moment, game-time decision to kill Biggie that night, like Bogny claims. At this time, Amir Muhammad, who the whole Russell Poole theory claims was the shooter, was living way out in the Inland Empire. Later, he would move down to Chula Vista near San Diego, but when Biggie was killed, he's in the Inland Empire, which is at least an hour away from the scene of Biggie's murder in Los Angeles, if you're lucky with traffic. So if Biggie was killed 15 minutes after they realized he was at the party, that means whoever the killer was would have had to have already been in possession of a gun, loaded with high-powered ammunition, already driving around in David Mack's car for some reason, and doing it within just a couple of miles of the scene of the shooting in order to get there that quickly. And this is where the logic simply doesn't line up. It will take another 3 months before Bogny will offer up information on Biggie's murder again. This time via a phone call that he makes to one of the officers who've been interviewing him, made from a new prison that Bogny has been transferred to. And this new prison will be important to this story. On this call, Bogny claims he can now reveal the name of the suspect or suspects that Rafael Perez supposedly gave him for Biggie's murder, along with other new information that he suddenly remembered. And the person Kenneth Boagni names as Biggie's killer is not Amir Muhammad. And the name he gives will expose this whole apparent scheme and lead to the complete collapse of the foundation of Russell Poole's theory.